It can be easy to fall into the trap of viewing the Cold War as simply a conflict between East versus West or capitalism versus communism. I mean, that is part of it, but the Cold War involved so much more, including the struggle involving the global South, as well as the constant bugbear of nationalism. And nowhere did those two things come together more explosively than in the Middle East. For a period of time, taking advantage of Cold War politics, one man, Gamel Abdel Nasser, was the leader of a unifying Arab superstate. And then it was gone. I'm your host David, and this week we are going to look at Nasser and Pan-Arab nationalism. This is the Cold War. Speaking of nationalism, if you want to explore the rich cultural heritage of Scotland and have fun doing it, you need to download Conqueror's Blade, the sponsor of this video. Season 10, Highlanders, is now live, and new players can get 7 days of premium time by clicking on the link in the description. Conqueror's Blade is a free-to-play tactical MMO that lets you play in a vast medieval open world. Highlanders adds 3 new units to unlock, including claymore-wielding warriors, archers protected by vicious deerhounds, and, the most Scottish of all, bagpipers to buff you and your allies' troops. Take control of the Highlands on a new siege map and make sure to capture your opponent's artillery to use it against them while your siege engines level their defenses. Make sure to get the Battle Pass so you can complete challenges and unlock over 100 seasonal rewards, including Scottish-themed hero attire, skins for your weapons, and more. You can even customize your warlord with new facial tattoos. Season 10 is now live. Download the Conqueror's Blade now via the link in the description and get 7 days of premium time free as a new player. Okay, so this story has roots reaching back to at least 1916 and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and then the period following the end of the First World War, when the Allied powers reneged on their promise to grant independence to several new Arab states. The mandate system replaced the Ottoman Empire with the paternalism of 2 different empires, Britain and France. The British notably built deep ties to the monarchies in their mandates, using those relationships to ensure both economic influence as well as the ability to maintain military bases designed to extend and protect British imperial influence. The Arab people in these countries, however, did not feel particularly blessed by all of this outside influence, viewing it as a primary reason for the weakness of the Arab nations. The disastrous loss to the new Israeli state in the First Arab-Israeli War in 1948 did no favors for the position of the West in the Arab world, as many there saw the West backing Israel, allowing it to win the war. Naturally, however, Arab leaders and intellectuals sought solutions to resolve the problems and challenges their new nations faced. Many began to look to the idea of closer cooperation between the various Arab states as an opportunity to present a unified front against foreign influence. But the idea didn't just stop at closer cooperation. Some proposed a unified, integrated Arab state, which would not only make them truly free and independent, but would also give them the strength to reverse the result of the 1948 war and free Palestine. This idea came to be known as Pan-Arabism or Arab nationalism. And the story of Pan-Arabism can't be told without talking about one man, the president of Egypt, Gamel Abdel Nasser. Nasser was born in Egypt in 1918 into a working-class family, and by the time he joined the Egyptian military in 1937, he had become a fiercely patriotic Egyptian nationalist, firmly opposed to the foreign imperial influences he saw as holding Egypt back. This foreign influence was embodied in the British-backed and corrupt monarchy of King Farouk, probably seen correctly as a lackey to the British, who themselves continued to maintain a military presence in the country even after the 1936 abrogation of the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty. This all provided the fertile conditions for the growth of anti-regime groups, including the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood, as well as the groups inside the Egyptian military, like the Free Officers, of which Nasser was a prominent leader. And Egypt wasn't the only Arab nation seeing this type of growing opposition. The 1948 defeat had undermined the legitimacy of many Arab governments across the region. Syria was the first to break, with a military coup in 1949 allegedly involving CIA assistance. By the early 1950s, crisis began to sweep into Egypt as well. Clashes between anti-British protesters and the British Army took place, and a wave of arson attacks rolled across Cairo. This was met by a declaration of martial law by King Farouk, but 1952 saw the king removed from power and sent into exile. The coup had been spearheaded by the Free Officers, led by Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian military, General Naguib, as well as Colonel Nasser. The coup also had support from both the Muslim Brotherhood as well as the Egyptian communists, and the CIA, but watch our video on Operation Fat F***er for more on that. The Free Officers, and especially Nasser, slowly consolidated their power after the coup, repressing their main opponents. Political parties were banned and opposition was suppressed and even imprisoned. By 1954, Nasser had sidelined Naguib, becoming prime minister and then president in 1956. He embarked on a plan to not only modernize Egypt, but also promote a grand vision for the Middle East. Not only was he the undisputed leader of Egypt, he was about to become the undisputed leader of the Arab world. Nasser began his work mostly with domestic issues. He introduced agrarian reform, ruling that all land holdings over 200 acres would be redistributed to small farmers. He also took steps to improve social welfare for Egyptians, including improvements to healthcare and education provision to all Egyptians, including the poorest. He also nationalized some industries, and as a result, some modest growth was realized. Between 1957 and 1970, the year Nasser died, industrialization in Egypt grew by an average of 5.7% per year. Industry also grew its share of Egyptian GDP from 15.3% in 1952 to 23.2% in 1970. Illiteracy decreased from 75% to 65%. But most importantly for this story is that Nasser himself didn't portray himself anything like his predecessors. He was in regular contact with citizens of all classes and backgrounds, and held regular demonstrations and speeches to this end. He survived a 1954 assassination attempt at the hands of the Muslim Brotherhood at one of these events, which only helped fuel his popularity. But domestic popularity wasn't what pushed him to the forefront of the international stage. It was his foreign policy and staunch anti-colonialism that did that. So before we even get to the obvious stuff, we need to look at the 1953 founding of Sawt al-Arab, or Voice of the Arabs, a transnational Arab radio station based in Cairo. Nasser used the radio station, broadcasting on shortwave across the Arab world, to promote his foreign policy agenda based on Arab nationalism and deeply rooted in anti-Western and anti-Zionist rhetoric. It called for the close integration of the Arab world, repeating Nasser's message of a singular Arab nation with Egypt as its integral center. The establishment in 1955 of the Baghdad Pact, an alliance between Britain, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, and of course Iraq, which intended to contain Soviet expansion into the Middle East, played well into Nasser's criticisms. He portrayed the pact as a Western attempt to enhance their regional imperial influence at the expense of the Arabs. Interestingly, it was originally intended that Jordan join the pact as well, but this is where Voice of the Arabs began to play a real role. Voice of the Arabs accused Jordan of Western collaboration and of harming Arab unity. In response, thousands of Jordanians began to protest, and ultimately, Jordan declined entry into the Baghdad Pact. We should also point out that, unusually, Saudi Arabia adopted the Egyptian position towards the Baghdad Pact, citing Arab unity, but was far more likely the result of its rivalry with the Hashemite monarchies in Jordan and Iraq. Okay, so at this point we know Egypt is breaking its ties to the West. At the same time, Nasser was making public statements favoring the Soviet Union. Quote, "The Soviet Union is 7,500 kilometers away from us, and we have never had any problem with Russians. They never attacked us or stepped on our land. They never had a base here. Yet English kept our country under occupation for 70 years. End quote. This would seem to give a strong indication of where Nasser's sympathies lay. Except it didn't. Nasser was already among the global leaders working on what would become the Non-Aligned Movement, as well as continuing to promote Arab nationalism. But the perception that Nasser had communist sympathies caused a multitude of delays in the negotiation of a substantial arms deal between the United States and Egypt. Frustrated by the delays and the snubs that came along with them, Nasser stunned the world, announcing an $80 million arms deal with Czechoslovakia, purchasing fighters, bombers, tanks, ships, and artillery, a deal which would be paid for in Egyptian cotton. Of course, this type of arms deal was brokered with the full blessing of the Soviet Union. Since every action has an opposite and equal reaction, the United States and the West responded by withdrawing their financial support for the Aswan High Dam, a key infrastructure project which would allow Egypt to not only produce hydroelectric power, but also control the flooding of the Nile River, allowing an expansion of suitable land for cultivation and agriculture. Nasser, who wanted his dam, looked for alternate ways to finance its construction, and it didn't take him long to figure out his next option, the Suez Canal. Controlled by the British even after Her Majesty's armed forces withdrew in 1956, it was scheduled to be given over to the Egyptians in 1968 by the terms of the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty. Only weeks after the last British troops withdrew from the Canal Zone, on July 26, 1956, Nasser, seeing the opportunity to not only gain a source of funding, but also a nationalist win, announced the nationalization of the canal and moved Egyptian troops in to take control. The assets of the Suez Canal Company were frozen, but despite Nasser's promise that the company would be compensated, the British were furious. By the autumn of 1956, several months after the nationalization had taken place, a combined British and French military operation took over the Canal Zone, while the Israelis invaded and overwhelmed the Egyptian military in the Sinai Peninsula. While a stunning military success, the Suez Crisis was a diplomatic catastrophe for the two Western nations. Both the United States and the Soviet Union denounced the invasion, pushing a resolution against the invasion through the United Nations General Assembly. The Soviet Union even threatened to enter the conflict on the side of the Egyptians. In the face of this diplomatic pressure, the French and British were forced to withdraw. Nasser almost overnight became not only an Egyptian hero, but the most popular leader in the Arab world. Celebrations broke out in the streets. It was the victory the Arabs had been seeking for so long. Nasser showed that a better future was possible if the Arab people could unite, but this very message was a direct threat to the pro-Western regimes in control of many countries like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Iraq, who feared Pan-Arabism would remove them from power. Voice of the Arabs fueled the pro-Arab sentiments, pushing for closer integration. The radio station quickly grew to be the sixth largest radio broadcaster in the world as millions listened. But not all of the Arab world was worried. In Syria, Nasser was seen as a savior, a bulwark preventing a communist takeover. The Syrian Ba'ath Party was coming to prominence at this time, and although they held several left-leaning views, including nationalization of certain industries, as well as land reform, they also rejected Marxist theories of class conflict and also supported general private property rights. The Ba'ath Party, fearful of a communist takeover of the Syrian armed forces, used their influence in the Syrian parliament to force the Syrian government to open unification talks with Egypt. Nasser was actually opposed to this idea to begin with, believing it to be happening too quickly, but he also realized the unique opportunity to begin the process of Arab integration. Ultimately, he agreed on unification with the Syrian leadership and the Baathists, but on three conditions. The first would be the holding of a referendum on the final decision. The second would be that all political parties in Syria would be banned, and that finally the army would have no role in politics of the new state. Now, the second and third conditions were problematic for the Syrians, as they knew that that would put them on an inferior footing to the Egyptians, but given the alternative of being removed altogether by a communist regime, they agreed to Nasser's terms. The referendum was held simultaneously in both countries, with over 99% of both populations voting in favor of the Union. The United Arab Republic was proclaimed on February 1st, 1958. So for anybody who's ever looked at a map of the Middle East, you will quickly realize there was a challenge with the new state. There was no shared territorial border. Despite this, the new UAR was to be ruled as a unitary state with Nasser as president. Almost immediately, a large-scale crackdown on communists in Syria was carried out. But, as anticipated, not all was rosy. Only 25% of the seats in the new National Assembly went to Syrians, and only one cabinet post. Furthermore, Nasser was charging ahead with his mandate to recreate more conservative Syria into Egypt's more socialist image, something that was quick to alienate the Syrian business class. Additionally, because hey, why not, the political and military classes in Syria were concerned over Egypt's clear dominance. But the hopes of Arab integration outweighed all of these concerns, at least at the start. Nasser's first visit to Damascus was a huge success, as he was greeted by huge crowds. Included in these crowds were hundreds of thousands of Lebanese who had crossed the border to see Nasser speak. As he was departing Damascus, Nasser spoke out against a failed Saudi Arabian-sponsored assassination attempt against him. His popularity across the entire region was so great that these accusations sparked a crisis in Saudi Arabia, which forced King Saud to abdicate in favor of Crown Prince Faisal. Okay, so with the establishment of the UAR, Arab integration and Pan-Arabism with Nasser leading the way was now an unstoppable and inevitable force, right? Yeah, no. Almost immediately, as in within weeks, a rival integration project was announced between the Hashemite kingdoms of Iraq and Jordan, the Arab Federation. And the primary purpose of this new union was to have a united front to stand against the Nasserite advance across the Arab world. As those of you watching who have brothers or sisters already know, there is no rivalry quite like sibling rivalry. The Arab Federation had the backing and support of the countries in the West, wanting to use it as a tool to contain the threats posed by both communism in the region as well as Nasser. For his part, Nasser publicly congratulated Iraq's King Faisal on the founding of what he called a blessed union. But the mouthpiece of the Egyptian regime, Voice of the Arabs, was quick to criticize the Arab Federation as an imperialist tool aiming to divide the Arab world. Both the UAR and the AF began to seek partners to join each of their new countries, with both focused on oil-rich Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. In March of 1958, the Sheikh of Kuwait hinted that they might join the UAR, but then followed this with a visit to Baghdad in May, which sent the rumor mill spinning that Kuwait might instead join the AF. At the end of the day, Kuwait joined neither, just like Saudi Arabia. And no further opportunities to expand the Arab Federation ever occurred, because in July of 1958, King Faisal II of Iraq and his Prime Minister, Nouri al-Said, were overthrown by the Iraqi Free Officers Movement, led by Abd al-Karim Qasim, himself a Nasserite Pan-Arabist. It didn't take long for the new Iraqi government to announce that it was withdrawing from the AF, but that it instead would be joining the UAR. This was on the heels of a declaration by the Kingdom of Yemen that it too would be joining the UAR as a federal state, to be called the United Arab States. Unlike Syria, however, Yemen was to join on the condition it retained absolute control over its own domestic affairs. It was on the heels of all of this that the 1958 Lebanon crisis emerged, with many Lebanese wanting to join the UAR in the face of equally wide opposition to the idea. For an in-depth look at this subject, please check out our video on the 1958 Lebanon crisis. Now, interestingly, it was actually Nasser that brokered the end of the Lebanon crisis. He recognized that Lebanon was a unique region with a very complicated political situation, and wasn't confident that the inclusion of Lebanon into the UAR would be the best course of action. So clearly we can see that Pan-Arabism was not only popular as an idea, but its implementation had momentum. So what happened? Well, the structure of the UAR itself is what happened. The Syrians, disillusioned by their unequal share of power and the autocratic rule of Nasser, grew restless. The continued implementation of socialist policies in Syria upset enough groups that steps were taken. The Syrian Ba'ath Party, the same Ba'ath Party that had opened the door to Nasser in the first place, organized a military coup with secession from the UAR as its main objective. Nasser contemplated a military reprisal, but felt that a war between Egypt and Syria would have been far more detrimental to the cause of Arab nationalism than anything that could have been gained. The collapse of the UAR was the beginning of the end for the Nasserite project of an Arab national project. Instead, Nasser turned his attention to Yemen, where he sided with the Republicans in the civil war that had broken out there. His hope was that the blow to his prestige that he had suffered with the separation of Syria could be made up by a quick victory in support of Yemeni Republicans. With up to 70,000 Egyptian troops involved in a protracted Arab civil war, however, Nasser found no prestige, only grinding combat and accusations of Arabs killing Arabs. By 1968, having suffered major losses, Nasser was forced to withdraw from Yemen. 1964, though, had seen a win for Nasser, helping to establish the Palestinian Liberation Organization under the auspices of the Arab League, but this win for Pan-Arabism was overshadowed by the mess unfolding in Yemen. But the real end of Pan-Arabism, the final nail in its coffin, was the 1967 Six-Day War. Fuad Ajami even called it the Waterloo of Pan-Arabism. In the war, the Arab coalition, including Egypt, found themselves unprepared to go to war, and the crushing military defeat at the hands of the Israelis exposed several major problems in the governments of the defeated. These included, but weren't limited to, absolutist rule, the militarization of politics, and the politicization of the military, as well as just generally poor governance. Even as Egypt was fighting and losing the war, the Egyptian public was being assured of imminent victory. It was only after Nasser personally addressed the nation that the scale of the disaster was revealed. Along with the revelation came Nasser's proposal to resign his position. But his popularity was such that Egyptians took to the streets to show their support, calling on him to remain in power. He remained president until his death in 1970. Nasser's successor, Anwar Sadat, led a fundamental shift in Egypt's global position, turning to the West and seeking rapprochement with Israel at the expense of Arab nationalism. Nasser's death marked the end of Pan-Arabism as a force in the Middle East politics. While the idea remained, there was no force strong enough with a significant enough position to push forward with its implementation. There's no doubt that had Nasser succeeded in his goals of a strong, unified Arab state in the Middle East, global politics would have played out in a very different fashion than they did. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have proposed the idea of not just pressing one bell button, but of uniting all bell buttons into one large bell button that will stand as a singular power. We are all now Pan-Buttonists. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of our patrons, since without your help, none of this would be possible week after week. If you aren't a patron, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com, and we're active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. This is The Cold War Channel, and as we think about the Cold War, I will leave you with the words of JFK. In the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.